Welcome to Void of Fears, where the line between reality and nightmares blur with every tale. What you're about to hear has happened to someone, somewhere, perhaps even someone just like you. Our community continues to grow, and now we're reaching for 100,000 subscribers. If these glimpses into the unknown call to you, please consider subscribing. Now let's dive into tonight's story. The camera's red recording light flickered like a dying star in the cluttered darkness of Jack Harrison's study. At 75, his hands bore the liver spots and tremor of age, but his eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had made him NASA's youngest communications specialist in 1969. Those eyes had seen too much. "My name is Commander Jack Harrison," he began, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "Retired NASA, clearance level. Well, that doesn't matter anymore. What I'm about to tell you happened 56 years ago, but it's been happening every day since. NASA didn't just bury it, they built an entire infrastructure around keeping it secret." He gestured to the walls around him, lined floor to ceiling with technical manuals, star charts and photographs that most people would never see. Hidden among the official NASA memorabilia were other things, hand-drawn sketches of geometric patterns, audio equipment that looked military-grade, and notebooks filled with symbols that resembled no human language. I was 19 when I first heard them breathing. Thought I was losing my mind. Turns out I was one of the few people sane enough to listen. The story Jack was about to tell would shatter everything the world believed about humanity's greatest achievement. But more than that, it would reveal a truth so profound and terrifying that it had shaped the course of human history for over half a century. July 15th, 1969. Mission Control in Houston hummed with the controlled chaos of a space launch. Jack Harrison sat at Console 17, monitoring communication frequencies between Earth and the Apollo 11 spacecraft. At 19, he was the youngest person in the room, which meant he got the routine assignments, while the veterans handled the critical systems. Jack didn't mind. He'd grown up listening to radio signals from around the world, fascinated by the idea that voices could travel through empty space. His father had been a radio operator in World War II, and Jack had inherited both his technical aptitude and his obsession with the invisible connections that linked human beings across vast distances. 3 days into the mission, as Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins hurtled toward their date with history, Jack noticed something that would change his life forever. It started as a whisper beneath the static on frequency 259.7, a channel that should have been empty. Jack adjusted his headphones and fine-tuned the reception. The sound became clearer, a rhythmic pattern that seemed almost organic, like breathing, but with a cadence that was distinctly non-human. "Hey, Tommy," Jack called to his supervisor, Dr. Thomas Reeves, a former Air Force communications officer who ran the junior staff with military precision, and picking up something weird on the auxiliary channels. Dr. Reeves walked over, his coffee mug in one hand and a clipboard in the other. He was a good supervisor, demanding but fair, and one of the few people who took Jack's technical insights seriously despite his age. "What kind of weird?" Reeves asked, putting on a spare headset. "Like breathing, but not human breathing. Listen." Dr. Reeves frowned as he listened to the signal. After several minutes, he removed the headset and looked around the room to see who might have overheard their conversation. "Jack, I need you to isolate this frequency and record everything. Don't mention it to anyone else until I get back." Dr. Reeves disappeared for nearly an hour. When he returned, he was accompanied by Dr. Patricia Webb, the senior communications director, and 2 men Jack had never seen before. They wore the kind of conservative suits that screamed government, but their bearing was military. "Mr. Harrison," Dr. Webb said, her voice carefully neutral, "Dr. Reeves tells me you've detected an anomalous signal. We'd like to hear it." Jack played back the recording he'd made. The breathing pattern was even more pronounced now. and there seemed to be underlying harmonics that created an almost musical quality to the sound. The two men in suits exchanged glances. One of them, a tall man with prematurely grey hair, stepped forward. "I'm Colonel Frank Morrison, Defense Intelligence Agency. This is Dr. Elizabeth Kane from the National Security Agency's Signals Intelligence Division. What you've discovered is classified, son. We're going to need you to sign some papers." Over the next hour, Jack found himself in a windowless conference room signing documents that he barely understood. The basic message was clear. He was now part of a classified program, and discussing what he'd heard with anyone without proper clearance was treason. "The signal you detected isn't new," Dr. Kane explained after the paperwork was complete. "We've been tracking similar transmissions since 1968, but they've been intermittent and weak. This is the strongest and most sustained signal we've recorded." Colonel Morrison opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder marked with classification stamps. "Our analysis indicates the transmission originates from the lunar surface, specifically from a region on the far side that remains in permanent shadow. The timing isn't coincidental. The signals have been getting stronger as Apollo 11 approaches the moon." "What's causing it?" Jack asked. "That's what we're going to find out," Dr. Webb replied. "Apollo 11 has secondary objectives beyond the public mission. During the communication blackout tomorrow, when the spacecraft passes behind the moon, Armstrong and Aldrin will be conducting a classified reconnaissance of the far side." Jack spent the rest of the day at a new workstation, equipped with recording equipment far more sophisticated than anything he'd used before. His job was to monitor and document the anomalous signal, noting any changes in frequency, amplitude, or pattern. As Apollo 11 approached the moon, the breathing sounds became more complex. There were now multiple distinct patterns, as if different sources were communicating with each other. Jack began to suspect he was listening to a conversation, though the participants were speaking in a language unlike anything on Earth. The next morning, July 20th, 1969, the world watched as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin began their descent to the lunar surface. But Jack was focused on something else entirely. During the famous communication blackout, when Apollo 11 disappeared behind the moon, and the public was told that radio contact was impossible, Jack sat in the classified communications center with Dr. Webb and a team of technicians he'd never seen before. They were in constant contact with the astronauts, recording every word of their observations of the far side of the moon. "Houston, we have visual contact with the anomalous structures," Armstrong's voice crackled through the speakers. "They're much larger than our briefing materials indicated. Geometric formations, extending from multiple crater walls, arranged in patterns that suggest deliberate construction." Buzz Aldrin's voice joined the transmission. "Neil, these formations are ancient. The surface weathering suggests they've been here for millions of years, but the geometric precision is clearly artificial." "The breathing signal is intensifying," Armstrong continued. "It's definitely coming from the largest structure cluster. There's also movement, large shapes shifting within the formations, almost like they're responding to our presence." Jack felt a chill run down his spine. The breathing sounds in his headphones had indeed intensified, and there was something new in the pattern, a sense of urgency, almost like excitement. "Apollo 11, can you determine the composition of the structures?" Dr. Webb asked into a microphone. "Negative, Houston. They appear to be made of the same material as the lunar surface, but arranged in ways that defy natural formation. The largest structure is approximately 2 kilometers in diameter and extends at least 500 meters above the crater floor." The transmission continued for nearly an hour, with Armstrong and Aldrin describing a lunar landscape that bore no resemblance to the barren wasteland the public expected. According to their reports, the far side of the moon was home to massive ancient structures that showed clear signs of intelligent design. But the most disturbing revelation came near the end of the blackout period. "Houston, we're detecting additional signals now," Armstrong reported. "Not just the breathing pattern, but complex harmonics that seem to be responding to our voice transmissions. It's almost like they're trying to communicate." When Apollo 11 emerged from behind the moon and public communications resumed, Jack noticed a subtle change in Armstrong's demeanor. The confidence and steady professionalism were still there, but there was something else. A tension that hadn't been present before. The successful moon landing and safe return of the astronauts dominated headlines around the world. But for Jack, the real story was just beginning. 2 weeks after the mission, he was summoned to another classified briefing. This time, the conference room was filled with officials from NASA, the Pentagon, the CIA, and agencies he'd never heard of. Dr. Webb stood at the front of the room beside a screen showing lunar photographs that had never been released to the public. The images showed the structures Armstrong and Aldrin had described. Massive geometric formations that looked like a fusion of architecture and geology. "Gentlemen," Dr. Webb began, "analysis of the lunar samples and photographic evidence has confirmed our worst fears. The structures on the far side of the moon are not natural formations. They show signs of deliberate construction using techniques that exceed our current understanding of engineering." A man in an Air Force uniform raised his hand. "Dr. Webb, what's the estimated age of these structures?" "Geological analysis suggests they were constructed between 2 and 5 million years ago, long before human civilization, possibly before human evolution." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Jack felt his worldview reshaping itself around this new reality. Colonel Morrison stood up. "There's more. The breathing signals have continued since Apollo 11's return, but they've changed. They're more complex now, almost like a language developing in real time, and we've detected response signals." "Response signals?" someone asked. "Transmissions originating from Earth, specifically from deep ocean trenches and underground caverns that we've never fully explored. It appears that the lunar contact triggered some kind of awakening process." Dr. Kane activated a tape recorder. "This was recorded 3 days ago from our deep-sea monitoring station in the Pacific." The sound that filled the room was unmistakably similar to the lunar breathing pattern, but with subtle variations that suggested a different source. Jack realized they were listening to a conversation between whatever was on the moon and something that had been waiting on Earth. "The implications are staggering," Dr. Webb continued. "Apollo the 11th of May have made contact with an intelligence that has been dormant for millions of years. Our presence on the moon appears to have activated some kind of communication network that spans both celestial bodies." Over the following months, Jack was integrated into what he learned was called the Lunar Project, a classified program dedicated to monitoring and understanding the alien intelligence they had discovered. His role expanded beyond just recording signals. He became part of a team analyzing the patterns and trying to decode what might be a form of communication. The work was fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. The signals were becoming more sophisticated with each passing day, evolving from simple breathing patterns into complex harmonic structures that seemed to carry information. Jack began to suspect they were witnessing the birth of a new form of language, one designed to bridge the gap between alien intelligence and human understanding. But the most disturbing discovery came 6 months after Apollo 11. Jack was working late one evening, analysing signal patterns, when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The breathing sounds weren't just random anymore. They were synchronized with human activity. When major cities went to sleep, the signals quieted. When large populations woke up, the signals intensified. Whatever was out there wasn't just communicating with its counterparts on Earth. It was watching humanity, learning their patterns, studying their behavior. Jack brought his discovery to Dr. Webb, who immediately escalated it to the highest levels of the program. Within days, the lunar project had expanded into a full-scale intelligence operation, with monitoring stations placed around the globe to track the alien signals and their correlation with human activity. The picture that emerged was even more disturbing than Jack had imagined. The alien intelligence wasn't just observing humanity, it was preparing for something. The signals showed increasing coordination between lunar and terrestrial sources, and the patterns suggested a countdown of some kind. Years passed. Jack rose through the ranks of the lunar project, eventually becoming one of its senior analysts. He married his college sweetheart, Linda, and had 2 children, but the secret he carried affected every aspect of his life. How do you plan for the future when you know that something ancient and incomprehensible is watching your species and preparing for an event you can't predict or prevent? The other Apollo missions provided additional intelligence, but also deepened the mystery. Apollo 12 through 17 all reported similar structures on the far side of the moon, but with significant changes from mission to mission. The formations were growing, evolving, adapting to the repeated human presence. Most disturbing was the discovery made during Apollo 17 in 1972. Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt reported that the largest structure complex had developed what appeared to be a massive focusing array, a collection of geometric formations that seemed designed to amplify and direct the breathing signals toward Earth. "It's like they're building a communication system," Cernan reported during the classified portion of his mission, "but the scale suggests they're preparing to communicate with something much larger than our small monitoring team." That was the last manned mission to the moon, officially because of budget constraints. In reality, the lunar project had recommended suspending lunar visits until they better understood what they were dealing with. The 1980s brought new developments. The alien signals had evolved beyond simple breathing patterns into something that linguists and mathematicians agreed resembled a true language. The lunar project recruited experts from universities around the world, sworn to secrecy, and told they were working on theoretical communication models. Jack became the project's senior linguist, working with a team that included some of the brightest minds in communication theory. They made remarkable progress in understanding the structure of the alien language, but the content remained largely incomprehensible. What they could determine was troubling. The signals seemed to be instructional in nature, like a series of lessons or preparations. The terrestrial sources were responding with increasing sophistication, suggesting that whatever was on Earth was learning from the lunar intelligence. In 1989, on the 20th anniversary of Apollo 11, Jack experienced something that changed his understanding of the situation entirely. He was working late at the lunar project facility, analyzing new signal patterns, when he noticed something extraordinary. The alien language wasn't just evolving, it was incorporating elements of human language. Words, phrases, and concepts from English, Russian, Chinese, and other major languages were being woven into the breathing patterns. They were learning to speak to humanity in humanity's own languages. Jack immediately called Dr. Webb, who was now director of the lunar project. She arrived at the facility within an hour, accompanied by several other senior staff members. "Play it again," she said after listening to Jack's recording. The signal was unmistakable. Embedded within the breathing pattern were recognizable words: Earth, human, prepare, coming, home. "My God," Dr. Webb whispered. "They're not just learning our languages, they're preparing to make contact." The implications were staggering. For 20 years, the lunar project had assumed they were dealing with an intelligence that was fundamentally alien, incomprehensible, and distant. But now it appeared that this intelligence had been using those 20 years to learn about humanity, to understand human culture and communication, and to prepare for direct contact. The 1990s brought accelerated development. The alien signals became increasingly sophisticated, incorporating not just human languages, but human concepts, references to human history, and even elements of human culture. Jack and his team realized they were witnessing the most remarkable learning process in history, an ancient intelligence absorbing and adapting to human civilization in real time. But there were also disturbing developments. The terrestrial signals were becoming more active, and new sources were appearing around the globe. Deep ocean monitoring stations detected massive movements in oceanic trenches. Seismic sensors recorded unusual activity in cave systems and underground formations. It was as if something vast and ancient was stirring beneath the Earth's surface. In 1999, 30 years after Apollo 11, Jack received a call that would reshape his understanding of everything he thought he knew. "Jack, you need to get to the facility immediately." Dr. Webb's voice was strained. "We've received a direct transmission." Jack arrived at the Lunar Project headquarters to find it in a state of controlled chaos. Every monitoring station was active, every analyst was at their post, and the air was thick with tension. "What kind of direct transmission?" Jack asked. Dr. Webb led him to the main communication center, where a large screen displayed a waveform pattern unlike anything they had recorded before. "It came through an hour ago," she explained. "Not the usual breathing pattern, not the evolved language structures. This was a clear, direct message in perfect English." She activated the recording. The voice that emerged from the speakers was unlike anything Jack had ever heard. Not quite human, but not entirely alien either. It was as if someone had taken the concept of human speech and rebuilt it from first principles. "Greetings, Earth. We have been listening. We have been learning. We have been preparing. The time for hiding is ending. The time for reunion is beginning." The message continued for several minutes, explaining that the intelligence they had been monitoring was not alien at all, but something much more complex and disturbing. According to the transmission, the lunar structures were built by an ancient terrestrial civilization that had achieved space travel millions of years before humanity evolved. "We are your predecessors," the voice explained. "We are what you will become. We have been waiting for you to develop the technology to reach us, to prove that you are ready for the next phase of evolution." The transmission revealed that the breathing signals had been a form of long-distance communication between the lunar colony and the hibernating remnants of the ancient civilization on Earth. Apollo 11 had inadvertently awakened this network, triggering a process that had been dormant for millions of years. "We have been studying your species, learning your languages, understanding your culture. You are not yet ready for full contact, but that time is approaching. We will guide your development as we were once guided by those who came before us." The message ended with a promise and a warning. "We will reveal ourselves when humanity has demonstrated the wisdom to handle the truth of its origins and its destiny. Until then, we will continue to watch, to learn, and to prepare you for what is to come." Jack sat in stunned silence as the implications of the message sank in. Everything they had believed about human history, about evolution, about humanity's place in the universe, was wrong. They weren't alone in the cosmos, but they weren't dealing with aliens either. They were dealing with their own predecessors, an ancient human civilization that had achieved technologies beyond current understanding. The early 2000s brought rapid changes to the Lunar Project. The ancient intelligence, which had begun calling itself the predecessors, initiated a program of gradual contact. They began sharing technological insights, guiding human development in subtle ways, and preparing for eventual full disclosure. Jack found himself at the center of these communications, serving as one of the primary liaisons between the predecessors and the modern human governments. It was a role that required him to maintain absolute secrecy while helping to guide humanity's preparation for a revelation that would change everything. The predecessors explained that they had been manipulating human development for centuries, subtly influencing technological advancement to ensure that humanity would eventually develop the capabilities necessary for reunion. The space program, computer technology, genetic engineering, and artificial intelligence had all been guided by their subtle influence. "We have been gardeners," one of their communications explained, "and humanity has been our greatest cultivation. You are not our descendants in the biological sense, but you are our inheritors in the intellectual and spiritual sense." As Jack entered his 60s, he began to understand the full scope of the predecessors' plan. The gradual revelation of their existence was only the first phase. They intended to guide humanity through a transformation that would elevate the species to their level of development, but only if humanity proved capable of handling the responsibility that came with such power. The breathing signals that had started everything were revealed to be a form of meditation or prayer, a way for the predecessors to maintain their connection to the Earth while living in exile on the Moon. The terrestrial responses came from ancient sites around the globe, where predecessor artifacts and installations lay hidden, waiting for the right time to be revealed. But there was a darker side to the predecessors' plan. They had been monitoring humanity, not just to guide its development, but to evaluate its worthiness. If humanity failed to meet their standards, if the species proved too aggressive, too destructive, or too primitive, the predecessors had the capability to start over with a new evolutionary path. "We have done this before," one particularly chilling communication revealed. "Multiple species have inhabited this planet, each reaching a certain level of development before proving inadequate for the next phase. Humanity is the fifth attempt. We hope it will be the last." Jack realized that the lunar project wasn't just a scientific endeavor, it was humanity's audition for survival. Every decision made by modern human civilization was being evaluated by intelligences that had the power to determine the species' future. By 2010, the predecessors had begun the next phase of their plan: selective disclosure. Carefully chosen individuals around the world began receiving direct contact, usually through dreams or visions that conveyed specific information about advanced technologies or philosophical concepts. These individuals, unaware of the larger program, would then develop innovations that moved humanity closer to the predecessors' goals. Jack watched as humanity's technological development accelerated exponentially. Advances in quantum computing, genetic engineering, space travel, and artificial intelligence were happening at a pace that seemed impossible through natural innovation alone. The predecessors were now actively guiding human development, preparing the species for the final phase of their plan. But Jack also began to notice disturbing changes in the communications. The breathing patterns that had once seemed benevolent now carried undertones of impatience. The predecessors were growing frustrated with humanity's slow progress in certain areas, particularly in developing the wisdom and ethical frameworks necessary to handle advanced technology responsibly. "Your species excels at innovation but struggles with wisdom," one transmission noted. "You develop power faster than you develop the judgment to use it responsibly. This is a pattern we have seen before, and it does not end well." In 2015, Jack received his final official briefing from the lunar project. Dr. Webb, now in her 80s, called him to her office for a conversation that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "Jack, I'm retiring, and the project is entering a new phase. The predecessors have informed us that they're moving toward full disclosure within the next decade. Humanity will soon learn the truth about its origins, its purpose, and its future." She handed him a sealed envelope marked with classification levels he'd never seen before. "This contains the complete timeline for disclosure, as well as your role in the process. The predecessors have specifically requested that you serve as one of the primary spokespersons when the truth is revealed. They believe that someone who has been part of the project from the beginning, who has lived with the secret for so long, will be the most credible witness to humanity." Jack opened the envelope and read the documents inside. The plan was breathtaking in its scope and terrifying in its implications. The predecessors intended to reveal themselves to humanity in 2025, exactly 56 years after Apollo 11. The revelation would be accompanied by demonstrations of their technology, proof of their ancient civilization, and an ultimatum. Humanity would have 10 years to prove its worthiness to join the galactic community the predecessors had been part of for millions of years. If humanity passed the test, it would be elevated to a new level of existence, gaining access to technologies and knowledge that would transform the species. If humanity failed, the predecessors would implement what they called the Reset Protocol, a complete restructuring of Earth's biosphere to give evolution another chance to produce a worthy successor species. The breathing signals were never just communication, Jack realized as he read the documents. They were a countdown, a timer measuring humanity's progress toward readiness for this moment. As Jack entered his 70s, he began to experience the psychological toll of carrying such enormous secrets for so long. The knowledge that humanity's future hung in the balance, that every major decision made by world leaders was being evaluated by ancient intelligences with the power to destroy civilization, was almost too much to bear. He found himself unable to form deep relationships, always aware that the people he cared about were part of a species that might not survive the next decade. His marriage to Linda had ended in divorce, not because of any failure of love, but because the weight of what he knew made normal human connection impossible. His children, now adults with families of their own, sensed that their father carried some enormous burden, but they could never understand its true nature. Jack watched his grandchildren play and wondered if they would live to see adulthood, or if they would be casualties of humanity's failure to meet the predecessors' standards. The 2020S brought accelerating signs that the disclosure timeline was on track. The predecessors began revealing themselves to world leaders, providing irrefutable proof of their existence and their plans. A secret consortium of governments was formed to manage the transition, with the understanding that public revelation would come in 2025. Jack found himself at the center of these preparations, working with presidents, prime ministers, and other world leaders to develop strategies for revealing the truth to humanity without causing global panic. It was a task that required careful consideration of psychology, sociology, religion, and geopolitics. But as 2025 approached, Jack began to receive disturbing reports from the monitoring stations. The breathing signals were changing again, becoming more urgent, more demanding. The predecessors were growing impatient with humanity's slow progress in certain critical areas. Climate change, nuclear proliferation, artificial intelligence development, and social inequality were all progressing in directions that concerned the predecessors. Their communications began to carry warnings that humanity was approaching several critical thresholds that could trigger the Reset Protocol. "Your species has remarkable potential," one recent transmission stated, "but it also demonstrates the same destructive patterns that led to the failure of your predecessors. We cannot allow another civilization to develop the power to threaten the stability of the galactic community." In early 2025, Jack received a communication that chilled him to the bone. The predecessors had moved up their timeline. Instead of waiting until the end of the year for disclosure, they intended to reveal themselves within weeks. Humanity's evaluation period was being shortened because of concerning developments in global politics and technology. "The breathing signals you first detected in 1969 were our way of measuring your species' readiness for contact," the message explained. "Those signals are about to change into something else entirely, a final call to prepare for judgment." Now, sitting in his study, with the camera recording his confession, Jack felt the weight of 56 years of secrets pressing down on him like a physical force. The knowledge that had shaped his entire adult life was about to become public, and he wasn't sure humanity was ready for the truth. 3 weeks ago, he told the camera, the breathing signals changed for the final time. They're no longer just communication between the predecessors and their Earth-based installations. They've become something else, a summoning call. Jack turned to his monitoring equipment, which showed real-time displays of the signals he'd been tracking for decades. The patterns were unlike anything he'd seen before. Complex, urgent, and clearly preparatory. The predecessors are preparing to emerge from their lunar installations and their terrestrial hiding places. They're going to reveal themselves to humanity, but not in the gradual, careful way that was originally planned. Something has forced their hand, and they're moving to full disclosure immediately. He showed photographs from his personal telescope, images that revealed new activity on the lunar surface. Structures that had remained dormant for decades were now showing signs of activation. Lights were visible in the ancient installations, and new formations were appearing with each passing day. But that's not the most terrifying part, Jack continued. The most terrifying part is what I've detected coming from Earth itself. He activated another set of monitoring equipment, this one focused on terrestrial signals. The displays showed activity from locations around the globe, the deep ocean trenches, the underground caverns, the ancient sites where predecessor installations had been hidden for millions of years. They're all activating simultaneously. Every hidden installation, every dormant facility, every concealed base that the predecessors established millions of years ago. It's like a vast network coming online all at once. Jack's voice began to shake as he revealed the final, most disturbing discovery. Yesterday I detected something that made me realize why the predecessors have accelerated their timeline. The signals aren't just coming from their installations anymore. They're coming from inside major population centers. The predecessors haven't just been hiding in remote locations, they've been living among us. The implications hit Jack like a physical blow. The ancient intelligence that had been guiding humanity's development hadn't been doing so from a distance. They had been here all along, integrated into human society, watching and evaluating from within. I think some of the people we've been working with, some of the government officials, some of the scientists, some of the world leaders, I think some of them aren't human at all. I think they're predecessors who have been living among us for decades, maybe centuries, preparing for this moment. Jack stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the quiet suburban neighborhood where he'd lived for 20 years. Everything looked normal. Houses with manicured lawns, cars parked in driveways, the everyday tableau of American suburbia. But now he saw it differently. How many of my neighbors are who they appear to be? How many of the people I've worked with over the years were actually predecessors, evaluating my performance, testing my reactions, preparing me for this moment? A sound made him pause. It was faint at first, barely audible, above the hum of his equipment, but it was unmistakably the breathing pattern he'd first heard 56 years ago, now coming through his speakers with crystal clarity. But this time, it wasn't coming from the moon, or from hidden installations. It was coming from outside his house. Jack looked out his window and saw them. They emerged from the shadows between houses, tall figures that moved with fluid grace through the darkness. At first glance, they appeared human, but there was something subtly wrong with their proportions, their movements, their very presence. They moved like people who had learned to be human but hadn't quite mastered the performance. "They're here," Jack whispered into the camera. "Not just arriving, they've been here all along. The disclosure isn't about them revealing themselves to humanity. It's about them revealing that they've already been controlling humanity." More figures appeared, emerging from houses throughout the neighborhood. Jack realized with growing horror that many of his neighbors, people he'd known for years, were now moving with the same fluid, inhuman grace. They had been hiding in plain sight, living human lives while serving as advance agents for the predecessor's plan. The breathing sound intensified, and Jack understood that it wasn't just communication anymore. It was a signal, a coordination frequency that was activating predecessor agents around the world. The final phase of their plan was beginning. The Apollo 11 mission didn't just make contact with something ancient and alien, Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper. It activated a plan that had been in place for millions of years. The predecessors didn't just guide human development. They infiltrated it, controlled it, shaped it according to their design. The figures outside his window began moving toward his house, their faces becoming visible in the streetlight. Jack recognized some of them. Dr. Patricia Webb, who had supposedly died years ago. Colonel Frank Morrison, who should have been ancient by now but appeared unchanged from their first meeting in 1969. Even some of his former colleagues from NASA, people he'd worked with for decades without suspecting their true nature. We were never alone, Jack said, looking directly into the camera. We were never in control. Everything we thought we knew about human history, about our achievements, about our destiny, it was all part of their plan. The moon landing wasn't humanity's greatest achievement. It was the moment when we finally proved we were ready to serve our true purpose. The breathing sound was now coming from inside his house, as if the very walls were alive with the presence of the predecessors. Jack realized that his own home, his sanctuary, had been compromised. Perhaps it had never been his at all. If you're watching this, then you need to understand that the world is about to change in ways that no one can imagine. The predecessors are about to reveal themselves, not as benevolent guides, but as the true architects of human civilization. We've been their experiment all along, and now they're ready to collect the results. The recording equipment began to malfunction, as if responding to some external interference. The lights in Jack's study flickered, and the breathing sound grew louder, more insistent. "I don't know what's going to happen to me," Jack said, his voice steady, despite the fear in his eyes. "I don't know what's going to happen to any of us, but I need you to know the truth. Apollo 11 didn't just land on the moon. It announced to our creators that their experiment had succeeded, that humanity was ready for the next phase of their plan." The camera's image began to distort, and Jack's voice became harder to hear over the breathing sound that now filled the entire house. "We're not alone. We never were. And we're about to find out what that really means." The recording ended abruptly as the equipment shut down, leaving only the sound of breathing and the whisper of movement in the darkness. Outside, the figures continued their patient approach, no longer hiding their true nature now that the final phase had begun. 56 years after Apollo 11, the secret was finally out. But as Jack Harrison had discovered in his final moments of freedom, some secrets are kept not to protect humanity from the truth, but to protect humanity from the realization that the truth was never theirs to discover. The breathing continued, steady and patient, as it had for millions of years. And in that sound, those who knew how to listen could hear the whisper of humanity's true destiny, guided by hands that had shaped civilization since before the first human had ever looked up at the moon and dreamed of reaching it. The predecessors had been waiting. Now, finally, they were ready to come home.